ocean of green. There are 6 red lights. And there's 143 green ones. Speaking of the vote. And me and Gio looked at each other and said, uh-oh. And sure enough, they got the whips on the floor, but they don't know who we are. They know the names, but they don't know who we are. So they got this this seating chart. So it's kind of like translation. I guess if you tell a joke at the UN, you know, the Russian guy tells a joke, and then it takes a little while for the French guy to get it, and he goes, ah. So there's this delay, and then sure enough, the whip comes right over to us. He goes like this, and he comes over this. What's up with that? Now, had I been elected at a younger age, I had some very choice Northeastern retorts to that question. But I did not share those. I ate those. I did not burn that bridge, nor did I singe it. I simply explained what I just told you, that this is not what the constituents I represent want. And Gio said the same thing, and he marches off. And we're like this. And then another one of the leadership comes over, and he starts giving us heck, and he says to us, you know what your problem is, you two? You listen to your constituents too much. Wow. And me and Gio went, and he stops away. And then Gio leans over and he says, I think he meant that as an insult. But we need to change the culture. Ken Paxton has been a constituency-based representative for 12 years. He understands that he answered to not any special interest in Austin, not any leadership in Austin. Nobody in Austin, Texas can vote for you, by the way. It's the 170,000 people that we answer to and the 810,000 that he currently answers to, and hopefully the 26 million that he will answer to. That's who we represent. That's what it's in your title, representative. And I got inspiration from a man named Tony Dolan over 20 years ago. Somebody that didn't have a pedigree, wasn't born with money, didn't descend from Mayflower, you know, he's not a Kennedy. Although he's a great Irish Catholic, man, you know. But he's so remarkable with what he's done. I didn't know until today that he was a protege of William F. Buckley. I never knew that. I knew he went to Yale, and he's got a neat story about how he met Buckley. I didn't know that as a teenager he met Ronald Reagan. In fact, sidebar, I didn't know that today was President Reagan's birthday. I mean, you want to talk about the hand of God. Tony and I tried to do this in January. He had some conflicts. So I wanted to do it in early February. And I just picked a date. I got the first Thursday in February 6th. Let's do that, February 6th. So today I find out via social media that it's President Reagan's birthday. So I picked Tony up at the airport. I said, Tony, did you know it was President Reagan's birthday? He texts me and goes, Pat, I thought there was a way to pick this day. That's a true story. So Susan and I got to have lunch with Tony, and we're chatting, and I said, Tony, you've been to Ireland? And he says, yeah, you know, I was in Ireland when I was a kid, and then I went back in '84. So I do the math. Oh, '84. Did you go to Ireland on Air Force One? He goes, yeah. I said, are you kidding? That's amazing. I mean, you got to think about the, oh, and you know, he wrote the Normandy speech, the 40th anniversary. Tony Dolan wrote that. His words and his prose have literally changed the world. As Steve knows, because he worked on the Reagan campaign when he was younger, very young. But you remember 1980, that banner, and said, together we can change the world. Wow, that gives me goosebumps now. And they did. They did it. We can do it too. It's not too late. We are at the precipice. But we need to change course. And banded together, we can. And Tony's also not only the youngest person ever won a Pulitzer, but, I mean, well, a lot of people don't know about this too, and this was taken in the Q&A section. He was one of the reasons, the way he won that Pulitzer was investigative reporting, taking down the mob in the 70s in Connecticut.
Oh, wow.
And he won that Pulitzer, he stood up to him, and he broke their back at a local tactical level. And then when he got into the White House, and this is a great story that I'll let you tell, but the Attorney General, not Ken Paxton, who we love, but the United States Attorney General asked Tony to come over through one of his staff members, and the whole institution, the RICO laws were already in the books, but they really hadn't used them. The Reagan administration broke the back of the Italian mafia in this country for good. Tony Dolan was a part of that, and I can make an argument to say that if he wasn't born, that may never have happened. He made a difference.
Here,
Ladies
here.
and gentlemen. Without further ado, let me introduce to you my dear friend and a great American, Mr. Anthony R. Dolan. I'm his friend and aide. Not that aide. Okay.
Can you hear me? Well, that's great. I want to thank the Keatings. I also want to say how wonderful it is to come to Texas and meet the Ewing family. It was great getting to know the lovely Susan at lunch and finding out why Pat, it's a real reason Pat's so successful.
Yeah, right.
And I want to thank Brandon and Katie and Courtney and Nick for doing such a great job. And Mike, I'll tell you, it was just like being back in Connecticut. A man with soul, and I just want to wish all your candidates the very best of luck. I have to tell you, coming to Texas brings a lot of personal and, well, I don't know, I guess very touching feelings of gratitude. I guess I owe this state and its people what every American does, but I grew up in the anti-communist movement that was beginning in the East in the late 50s and early 60s, and it morphed into the conservative movement. And in those years, there was one conservative senator, his name was Barry Goldwater. And then in 1960, the great state of Texas elected a political science professor who said he wanted to go to the US Senate to do one thing, and that was vote with Barry Goldwater. And John Tower eventually became a very established Republican, but in those days he was an icon and a firebrand of the conservative movement. I saw him speak in 1967 at the Young Americans for Freedom convention. And he used to call himself, he was 5'5½", the littlest senator from the biggest state. He said the only reason he got elected was the Chamber of Commerce wanted him out of the state before the tourist season started. But it was thrilling to have two whole conservatives, really well-spoken conservatives in the United States Senate. And then in 1976, and I have to tell you about this, I was a newspaper reporter and looking into a lot of wrongdoing and a classic instance of municipal corruption mixed up with the Gambino crime family, and a police department that was running the largest drug ring in southern Connecticut and had murderers in it, and 7 or 8 other city departments in the state government that was corrupt as well. But I cared about nothing as much as Ronald Reagan running for president in 1976. And he had won in North Carolina. Guess how, folks? The people who backed him there got rid of the professional consultants he was using and just put him on TV. And he was supposed to drop out, and he shocked everyone by winning the North Carolina primary. The next state up was Texas. Could Reagan stay in the race? If he won a few delegates, he'd stay in the race. Well, I was in the newsroom that night, and I can remember talking to the fellow who was running the statewide campaign for you. And I kept saying, Arthur, every delegate? Texas gave him every single delegate. And one of your numbers here tonight. Without Texas in 1976, there would have been no Ronald Reagan. So, I owe you that. I always want, when I get here, to go see the Alamo, because of course it had the, and I said, he said, yeah, sure, it's a 4.5-hour drive. I said, what? I keep forgetting how big your state is. I'm going to get there one of these days, but in my checkered past, I was a bar singer up on the east side of New York, and I want you to know that Jane Bauer's song, Remember the Alamo, was big up on the east side, and it's a wonderful, people, Texans are always saying, it's not very big, it's not very big. And somebody in Washington would say, it's not very big, it's not very good, it's just not that inspiring. I said, listen, I don't know how big it is, but it sure is inspiring. Now, I want to tell you one other thing. Last January, I got up, I've always been, some people play the violin, some people know how to play first base, and some people are terrific cornerbacks. But I got to tell you, I got up and I said, enough of this stuff. I've always known how to make trouble in political campaigns for the opposition. And we had just spent $1 billion between the Romney Super PAC and the $300 or $400 billion we'd spent. We couldn't even win Senate seats in places like Indiana and Montana. Our consultants are so brilliant. And so we put together, I knew the next test was going to be Virginia. We put together an opposition campaign. We did some ads, went to every conservative billionaire. There wasn't one bit of support because, oh, we spent all this money last time and it didn't work. And I went all around the country, finally came to Dallas. A great guy named Scott Noble not only gave us some support, but gave us some great ideas like don't let them Detroit, Virginia. And we said this would be the test case, and we're about to do this in 12 to 15 states, and we're going to win those Senate seats and take them away from the Democrats. And what we did in Virginia, we didn't have, all the Republican establishment was busy saying the state was lost. If you know what happened that night of the election, the 12-point lead for the Democrat became too close to call. If we were outspent 5-1 in the last week, if we had even a little bit more money, we would have walked away with that and stopped the Obama-Clinton machine that was trying to turn a red state purple. That's how easy they are to beat. Our ads, the minute they appeared, Kim Strassel, the best columnist for the Wall Street Journal, said, this is going to crack the Democratic code. Rush Limbaugh did 3 segments on those ads. And then a polling group showed that we were moving the ballot by 5 points. I bring all that up because, once again, it was Texas, at least from my perspective, making a difference. And now here we've got Pat Fallon. I've been watching his career for 20 years. He's been an inspiration. I've gotten to know your Senator Ted Cruz and been a minor help on it. And Pat is out of his mold, but he's also out of Ronald Reagan's mold, because he knows how to take the conservative message and make it appealing and personal and non-strident, and yet at the same time he's always loyal to those ideas. He's a troublemaker of the first order for the right and for the good. Reagan liked the quote, by the way, Andrew Jackson used to have, that one man with courage is a majority. Yes. And I promise you this, he's another bit of Texas serendipity in my life, and I'm sure in yours. I don't know how, by the way, a reserved Easterner got mixed up with so many rowdy people, but he's doing just fine down there, and I promise you, if someday you send him to Washington, I will keep a close eye and make sure he doesn't fall in with bad people. Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't the first birthday party I attended for Ronald Reagan. The first one was in the Roosevelt Room, which is just across from the Oval Office. It was his 70th birthday. He'd been in office only a few weeks. And in he came, and I was wondering as a speechwriter, what's his opening line going to be? Because we had just greeted him 2 weeks before on his first day coming down to work. And he had, we were in the actual White House residence, and he stood at the top of the stairway with Nancy. He'd come down from the personal headquarters. And we all applauded, and the orchestra was there, and they were doing a great job, and everyone was very happy. And his opening line at that moment, I thought he was going to have trouble topping this one. His opening line was, "I've just told the Chief of Staff it will not be necessary to have the entire staff in the United States Marine Corps Band greet me every morning on the way to work." So here we are on his 70th birthday, and I'm wondering, what's he going to say? We give him the cake, he blows the candles out, he's standing next to Nancy, and he says, "Say, listen, I know some great stories about 70-year-old men." And he looks down at Nancy, who's going, "But I don't think I'm going to get a chance to tell you any of them." And you know, as you can see from some of these pictures around here, I had a lot of downtime with Ronald Reagan. But doggone it, you know, I never asked him what those 70-year-old stories were about 70-year-old men. I'll bet they were savory. You know, he was joking in those first few weeks, and boy, you had to hand it to him, didn't you? If you put your mind back to 1980, those of you who remember, we had hostages in Iran. We had The Russians in Afghanistan, 25%, imagine this, interest rates, 7 to 8% unemployment, 12 to 14% inflation. We were the worst economic mess since the Great Depression. We had a military that didn't work anymore. We had planes, fighters that couldn't fly. We had ships that couldn't leave the port. The chief of staff of the army had said we have a hollow army. Everywhere in the world, there was pessimism. There was talk of malaise and limits. Europeans were writing books about why do democracies perish. And the US presidency itself was filled, magazines, papers, scholarly journals, why isn't the presidency working anymore? It's an outdated institution. The Soviet Union was at the height of its power and expansion, and they had brought 14 new nations into their gravitational pull in the 1970s. 3 in the Caribbean and Central America, 4 in Africa, the Horn of Africa in particular, or a strategic area, 3 in Southeast Asia, and things were as bad as usual in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So I've got to tell you, Ronald Reagan inherited an awful lot of problems. And think about what happened. This presidency that didn't work anymore as an institution, fast forward only 7 or 8 years later, 18 million new jobs, inflation at nothing, interest rates way down, the Soviet Union about to crumble and withdrawing everywhere in the world. A few besieged democracies were suddenly bursting out into many democracies all over the world. And, I always looked at that amazing series of events and I thought to myself, Ronald Reagan had just the right story for this. It was about a cowboy who was out one day riding and he's going around a bluff. And there was a Grand Canyon before him, that great expanse. He'd never seen it, and he'd never even heard about it. And so he just looked there for a while, and finally he said, boy, something sure happened here. And, historians are looking back at the Reagan presidency, and that's their reaction, even the ones who want to be critical of it. And I want to tell you something. I'm going to run through quickly the great events towards the end here. Of the Reagan presidency, and Pat's going to give me the third base sign, or just if you've been standing for a while and it's been a long day and a long night, but I do want to tell you about this. Take a moment of your time to tell you about something that I think explains all of that success, and it's the most memorable moment I had with Ronald Reagan, and it happened only a week or two, 33 years ago. From this, only a few weeks after that birthday party. He was going to speak to the Conservative Political Action Committee. It was my real first, I'd done some stuff in the campaign, but it was my real first full presidential speech. And I had to sign it. It was a homecoming for him. He'd spoken there many times. And I was happy when his draft came back, okay? I mean, he'd worked with it. I didn't realize how much he'd saved my draft. But he'd worked with it and made something very good of it. And well, I had speechwriter's glow. Look, when you send a speech draft around the White House, it goes on a staffing list, and there could be 15 to 20 people, and it's your job not only to put the content in, but it's your job to make sure it has a little bit of artistic flavor to it and works with an audience. So I got a call from Ken Kachigian, just as I was feeling great about tomorrow's speech, and he said there's been a last-minute protest. And I felt like, you know how you feel at the track when the 30-to-1 long shot you bet on comes in, and then there's a protest? Anyway, he said he was going to go over and talk to Reagan about it. And I said, well, great, and then I said, hey, Ken, can I come? Now, this was late in the afternoon, actually early evening. And he said, okay, I'm going to bring Lynn Nobziger. Do any of you remember Lynn Nobziger? Because, Lynn was not sartorially splendiferous, okay? He wore a Mickey Mouse tie. He always was disheveled, and Reagan loved him because he was always, irreverent and troubled, and always said the wrong thing. Reagan had grown up in Hollywood, the Friars Club, the roast, the one-liners. People forget he had a whole career before he was in politics. And Lynn was a reminder of those days. and he loved the back and forth with Lynn. Anyway, we all walked over, and Lynn and